It's such a pleasure to be able to hold the space for another conversation. This is the fifth in our African Book Talk series. And today, we're not just bringing you one writer speaking primarily about one book, but an entire feast. Those of you who have joined us before would be familiar that what we normally do is we have one writer and we talk about that writer's journey. We talk about the different works that they have done, whether it's short stories or novels, and then we zero in to one work, one primary work that we then spend most of our time talking about. But today we decided to do something different. We are going to bring you the editor of a literary journal. And we're going to figure out what it takes to create a home, a space where all these different artists can come, can have a conversation across the different genres around a particular issue. But before I go into introducing and beginning our conversation with our guest, Franklin Onsando, who is one of the editors and one of the co-founders of the journal Down River Road, which we'll be featuring today, let me give you a little bit of a taster of it. Normally we start with the first 3 minutes of the story. And this is the first 3 minutes in a way of the story. And this is from the introduction to the second issue. It is an issue on ritual. But these are the words of the editors. Introduction. On a bench in Nairobi CBD, Franklin Onsando talked about his motivations for starting a literary journal. He said, "Some people use their savings to buy land, a house, a car. I used mine to start a lit mag. Here, we present to you the second issue of said lit mag. It would be imprudent not to note that we would not be here today had Frank and Clifton Gachagua not thought it was a good idea to use their time and resources, both financial and otherwise, into bringing this venture to fruition. The temptation at this point is to say something about the pouring their blood into DRR, but we'll shy away from the cliche. Instead, we think back fondly and otherwise to December when the first issue of DRR was launched. It moved through the city, hand-delivered by Frank and Cliff, sold at bookshops and festivals, copies passed from friend to friend to friend of friend. It was an experiment in publishing, in trust and friendship, in distribution and reading cultures, and in further experimentation. And somehow, less than a year later, we've managed to make the second issue, Ritual, possible. But what a less than a year it has been. As with other crises, it became commonplace in thinking about the role of writing and of journals in the middle of a pandemic as widespread as COVID-19 for some cultural commentators to make overarching comments about the role of storytelling and storytellers within the crisis, and even as the crisis unsettles the myths and meanings of role work. And although this crisis within a crisis has perhaps been a long time coming, its intensity has magnified our vulnerabilities and made hyper-urgent the demand for new ways of being. So, from some corners that we occasionally, sometimes accidentally frequent, proclamations have been made in the genre of now more than ever. Now, more than ever, we need this kind of language. Now, more than ever, we need some kind of words that document, explain, shape, and reimagine the latest terms of our existence, which are at once historical and familiar. Why now, more than ever? So to answer that question, I'm really, really happy that I have Frank speaking to us on this podcast. And I have to say this, I am thoroughly enjoying, Frank, knowing that you're a journalist, having you on the other side of the interview, because you're usually the one asking the questions. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, Frank. Why now more than ever? What's the story?
What's the story? Yeah, that's good question. Thank you so much, Dr. Mshai. Thank you, Lillian, and thank you, CGC, for the opportunity for us to share the story of DRR and what we are doing. So why now, and what is DRR and what's up with the journal? So DRR sort of, we're still young. I think we're about 3 years old. We started putting this together just as conversation between friends. I think it's been going on for the longest time. I think the better part of the last 9 or so years. Just, friends that we met in Nairobi, some who came from outside Nairobi, some who went to study outside and came back. And, we've been having these conversations about publishing together and working together. And for my case, I'm in the middle of doing my master's, and I picked for my master's thesis. I just knew that I wanted to look at something about niche publishing, and from the models of journalism that I looked at, I figured that journalism is a bit restrictive in terms of and stiff in terms of allowing creative expression, or the way the journalism that we've been trained to practice. So leaning on the experience and sort of and the work of my friends who are working in poetry, working in fiction, working in creative nonfiction, we sort of decided to come together with this publishing experiment where we'll have some of our work in print and some of our work online, where we can play around with stuff and see what comes down. So that's how Down River Road came together. And I think at some point at night we were just talking about finding a name. For example, I think that was in maybe mid 2018 thereabouts. We were thinking about the name, and Major Mwangi's novel Going Down River Road really struck both Clifton and I. And first of all, it was the story of Nairobi coming together and sort of Nairobi being built, and it's being built by these two workers who are super working class, and they're building this building that they might never enter. And so that and like that, their stories and how they navigate where they're coming from every day to come to Development House to build it, sort of looked like how we converge in Nairobi to sort of earn a living or something. And then, our hearts, our memories, our ambitions, or even what you want to do might not necessarily be in this space. So we looked at Down River Road as that sort of stretch of road where everybody comes to Nairobi, more or less goes through something like that. And which was really interesting when we had our first call out, when we told people to think around place. And one of the stories that we got actually.
Before we come to place, because I do want to come to place, but I just want to unpack some of what you have said. So Major Mwangi's book, Down River Road, is a classic in Kenyan literature. And River Road is a very specific place. So I know we're going to come back to that. But I just want to go back to a few things that you have said, because I think the journal is, it came out, the first issues came out last year. Right. And that's when most of us got to hear about it. So I'm finding it really interesting that you've said that, people, it was this conversation, long conversation that had been ongoing. And you also have answered a question I was going to ask, which is, you're a journalist, and why you went into so many of these I'm not surprised to see in the first issue, which we'll come to, that you've got a very good eye as a journalist. I can see you talk about Jivanjiro, Road, another very specific place in Nairobi, but then it's not the usual kind of storytelling that you would do. So I think you've answered my question on why a journalist decided to set up a lit mag. But before we go into that, just tell me a little bit about yourself. You are a journalist. You work for, you write for actually not just one newspaper. I think you're known. Many Kenyans will know you in terms of one newspaper, but I've seen your work for different outlets. Just tell me just a little bit about that, because I'm trying to get a sense, and we'll talk about the rest of the team as well as we go, and then we'll come to the issues. Tell me, who is Frank? Because I want to know, maybe one day I too will say, instead of buying a car or a house, I'll start a lit mag. I'm trying to figure out who is Frank, which person, which African takes good money and puts it in a literature magazine. So tell me, who is Frank?
No, Mazin, I don't. Good question. So let me see, who's Frank? So I think I'll just define myself by my profession at this point. I'm a journalist. I've been practicing for, I think, 10 years in July. And I love reading, and yeah, I've just like grown up with stories and stuff, and that's how I ended into journalism, to tell stories. But like throughout my career, my interaction with journalism has been a bit, combative in a way, because of the forms of literature that you ordinarily consume, sort of to get informed, and what the mainstream media in Kenya allows you to put out. So that disconnect really frustrated me. And in 2016, I was lucky enough to win the David Astor Fellowship. So David Astor was this, guy who sort of started The Observer, or helped fund The Observer when it was starting and stuff. And his story is also quite interesting. And so the fellowship allowed me to go to work at The Guardian for a couple of months, and then also to work at The Economist and The Mail and Guardian in the US. And so in the South Africa. So I got to experience different media markets and see, how the media works, and how journalism is done. And I saw like it's the same all over the place. Like if I'm able to do like a journalism startup, I will always be restricted with sort of the same structures of rigidities of style, for example. So talking with my friends and having these continuous conversations. Clifton, who's my co-founder, we were roommates back in campus. In campus, we sort of started also another magazine in campus. We just sort of posting poems and think pieces on notice boards and stuff. And then we started putting it into an A4 printing thing that we were just distributing for free. So, during that period of campus, you were like, this is something that maybe we could explore after this. After campus, all of us went different ways. So 2017, after coming back from the fellowship, and then we were like, okay, that thing we wanted to do in campus, I think we can try it now. So, and then over the next 3 years, between 2017, 2 years, between 2017 and the end of 2019, we were able to sort of, together with the help of our friends, we were able to put down our thoughts on paper, and the first issue came out.
And what I really enjoyed about the issue is that you cover so many genres. So, I mean, I know Clifton is a writer in his own right, and you have poets, you have people who we know their names because of short stories. You have people who do nonfiction, and then for me, the absolute surprise was when I picked up the first copy of and yeah, okay, it's got a beautiful cover. And then I opened, and I'm expecting literature because it's a literary mag. And I'm going through, and there are all these amazing pieces of visual art interspersed right through the whole issue. And I thought, okay, the first issue, as you mentioned, is on place. So maybe they wanted to really evoke that. And then the second one comes, it's on ritual, and there's also art all over. And I'm going to ask David if he minds us just giving us a look at some of the artwork as we talk on. But I was going to ask you, could you speak really specifically as to why visual art in a literary journal, and not just as a token thing, but it really is right through the journal? The visual artists are in conversation with the writers. Visual art, why?
So for visual art, the first thing is we were looking at a couple of journals in terms of format, in terms of like even the paper texture, and in terms of like how the style looks like. And the first thing we were really excited about was Chimurenga. And we were like, okay, so broadsheet is a bit crazy to work with. So we sort of looked at Chimurenga, the chronic books. And that's the format that we were going to originally experiment with, but the printers could not provide us with that paper. So we settled back to A4. And then we have an amazing designer called Felix, who is also like has a really keen eye in terms of how to place the images and how to sequence them. And so the marriage between Felix, Clifton, and I, we were like, we could experiment more with images. And so on before the first issue, we had an exhibition with Anita Kavochi. Anita Kavochi is a member of Masai Mbili. This artist collective in Kibera. And then they do some amazing stuff. And before then, we hadn't really worked, quite in depth with visual artists. So when we worked with Kavochi on this exhibition, she was like, I mean, you guys, like you guys understand text, and text is amazing and stuff, but like you can do so much more stuff with illustrations, and you should also give your platform, you should also give space for visual artists on your platform. And that's how we sort of settled on Kabochi's painting as the cover for Place, because, you know, Kabochi's exhibition was called Thresholds, and essentially it was just Kabochi talking about the places that she's been to get there, and essentially, so it really spoke to place and to like the theme of place, and it was a no-brainer to like set on that particular painting, and also like just talk about her other works. And then we also now carry that as well, yeah.
And one thing I find really interesting is that there's a conversation between abstract pieces, such as the one we are seeing that's right in front of us right now, but you also have photographs. You also have, I mean, it's really, so this is what's on screen right now. That's the current cover of Ritual. That's by, I think it's Isaac Shamir, and I really like the abstractness of it. There seems to be, the body is in crisis. It's seeking to find its balance, you know, and it just gets me thinking about all the possibilities. But then you also have, you know, something like, and I'll show this at the end of this as David ends the PowerPoint, Aisha Mugo on the same issue, in fact, at the end of it, with a photograph. So I really find that juxtaposition very interesting. Could you say something a little bit more also about that?
Yeah, so when we had the call out, we invited artists and the illustrators and photographers to also, you know, interpret, for example, Ritual, the way they saw fit. And photographs, you know, photographs are really, can stand on their own as storytelling devices. You know, we've been sort of referencing and reading the works of the likes of Susan Sontag and John Badger, who talk about, like, you know, how photographs can sort of even talk about power relations, for example, and what it means between like the one who sees and the one who's seen, and the power dynamics between that, and what the camera does to someone, and, you know, how framing happens in photographs and stuff like that. So since we were doing print, and since we had actually worked with photos before, and we're like, you know, we could have photos, you know, big presentations of photos where they stand on their own and tell their own stories. And as well, we can also invite people to do illustrations that are abstract. And, you know, some of them you might actually be like, you're looking at it and you're like, wow, I mean, I don't know what's happening here, but like this is took my breath away. And we're like, yeah, we're going to have this in the series. So like we had artists give us like a series of illustrations, and these are guys who are like actively working in these mediums. And yeah, so we just wanted to share that with as many people as possible. And since we were printing all these copies, we were like, why not? Yeah.
That it really is a joy to go through the whole journal. You both have an online space, and you also have the print. And what I noticed when I went online, and perhaps you can give us the, you know, if people wanted to go online and just check out what's going on online, how they would get there, the address. I noticed that some, for instance, if I go to the issues, some of the stories are available, some of them are not. So my question is, if somebody is out of Nairobi, out of Kenya, I actually don't even know if I think you do deliver outside Nairobi, but if somebody's out of Kenya, is there a way they could get hold of the print journal? So just start by telling us, where do I go online to find you? And then if I do want a copy of the print, what happens there?
Yeah. Okay, so at the moment we are actually still working out on distribution. Like last year was really crazy in terms of issue 2, because we had this call out, and then so for issue 1 we had only contributions from Kenya, but for issue 2 we had contributions from all over the places. We had guys from India sending us stuff, guys from Trinidad sending us stuff, people from so like, and this was, so what happened at this time, we were like, because our policy is also to give contributors, you know, contributor copies, we wanted to try to get DRR in at least the capitals. You know, we're talking Lagos, we're talking Joburg, London, New York, and stuff like that.
Manchester.
But then COVID happened, and then we couldn't, you know, we were not able to do that, and then we were stuck a bit with the copies. So at the moment, we're just using like personal friends and couriers. You know, if you know someone who's going to London, if you know someone who's going to New York, you know, give them 10 copies here, 5 copies there. We haven't sort of figured out how to do let me say, international distribution just yet, because we're just small, and yeah, we're just doing it right now on a friendly basis. But we can do regionally. I think the last issue we did Zanzibar, we did Tanzania, we did Uganda, and we're just sort of hoping that, you know, slowly by slowly we'll be able to spread out, and even as, like, you know, travel things normalize and stuff, we'll be able to find couriers who can send us abroad, you know, affordably. Yeah. So what is on the site, mostly we do excerpts, sort of to just give people a taste of what is the journal, and then now to direct them to places where they can buy the journal as well, because it's also a way of raising funds for the next issue. Yeah.
What's the site again? What's the site?
Downriverroad.org.
Okay, downriverroad.org.
Downriverroad.org.
Yes. Before we go to talk about the issues, I want to talk about the people, right? And you've talked about the artists, and we've mentioned, you know, how you got on board. And the reason I asked that other question was the first issue seemed to me very much a conversation among Kenyans, at least Kenyan artists. Yeah. And then the second issue, it seems to be a continent-wide conversation. And that's why I was specifically interested in that. Could you tell me a little bit more about the editorial team, the people behind the journal? And I should say that the words that I read at the beginning were actually by the editors of the issue on ritual. And these are Wairimu Mureithi and Kerry Baraka. But then you have an interesting structure. You've got your editorial team, and then you've got editors for each issues. Tell me a little bit about the back end, how I think you've got a photo editor. How do you organize, and who else is involved?
Okay, so what we do is, I think the core team at this point is myself and Clifton, and then last time we had one boy join us to help us with the administrative and the social media work and the communication work. What happens is each issue, we invite people to help us edit, you know, in the spirit of curating together and making together, and also, you know, leaning on as many perspectives as we can, you know, understanding that we don't know everything. We started from like a point of questions, and we knowing that we don't have all the answers. So whenever we like have the opportunity to reach out to people who can help us edit, or who can be interested in editing fiction, non-fiction, or poetry, you know, we are really glad for that. So for issue 1, we had Bethel Mude as the series editor. And you know, Bethel is also a very interesting and amazing poet. And then for issue 2, we had Wairimu Mureithi and Kari Baraka to help with the series editing. And then, so what happens is when a series editor comes on, our work is just to sort of get the submissions, do the readings, and then curate some of it, and then, you know, hand the process over to them. And then they also now do their own selection, they do their shortlisting, and then they also now do the back and forths. And we are the intermediary between like them and sort of the readers and stuff. So like the project now becomes theirs. It's for Ritual now. Ritual is just for Wairimu Mureithi and Kari Baraka, for example. So like it's also an idea to also remove ourselves from like heavy editing, so to speak, because also like there are also some challenges that come about when like you have just like one perspective doing all the editing, which is something that we really avoided.
Now the right.
Also that. Sorry, can I just add on to this?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Clifton, please do.
Clifton.
Also, that's
the idea is you have Nduta and you have Karibaka, and Frankie and I are way much older than they are. They're in their 20s, and they're amazing, really, really great writer. So the idea is to have them be part. Like, how does a conversation happen between all of us?
Yeah.
That's the question. That's always going to be the question. And they're amazing writers. That's it.
And indeed, you know, talking about your amazing writers, one of the things, especially for a journal, I just thought was so amazing is that your first copy, as I said, it's a much smaller issue. It's people who are more or less in the same, at least national space or connected to it. And then, and as I read earlier, it wasn't even that you have a major distribution channel. You really worked the, friend to friend and friend of friend kind of thing. And then the second issue just seems to explode into this conversation across the continent. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit about that before we go into one of the issues. Let me just tell you, one of my favorite things about the second issue, even the first issue, is the way that when you go to the writers' bios, not only are they speaking from all over, but also each of them shares, most of them at least, share a little thought about what they think about the idea. And then they go into, and so when you read that and then you go to the story or you go to the piece or the visual art and you go between them, it is so fascinating. Could you say a little bit? I know we've got very many writers and it's a bit, you can't talk about every single one, but just give me a sense of how you got this wonderful community together.
And thanks for the compliment. So what happened with the call out for issue 2 was that I think issue 1 was really a success. I mean, it went even beyond our expectations. So when we did the call out, so issue 1, we got about 210 submissions. So when we did the call out for Ritual, we got about 400 submissions. And the task of going through them and knowing what to include and what to leave, but it was really, really excruciating at some point. Not less because someone was working from New York, someone was working from Kenya, someone was working from, and then it was just when COVID was starting, and oh my goodness, it was really crazy. So it was a really interesting experience, and I mean all those pieces that went in there. I think the hardest part was like leaving out some of the stuff that we couldn't accommodate. And so I think we got a very, very eclectic mix of contributions. I mean, I'm trying to think about for rituals. So we had rituals on food, and even the call out that Muriithi and Kari circulated was quite interesting. We had a long ass call out of about 1,000 words and stuff, and Kari and Wairimu just did like a paragraph. Just tell us what you think about rituals. Rituals of sending text messages, rituals of shitting, rituals of etc. And it was like really, really concise. And that's how people just interpreted them in their own way. But still, when we were reading together and selecting the pieces, it was quite interesting to see it coming together as a cohesive whole. So when you talk about Baby Ophelia's ritual of cooking as making home, and how we carry the fragrances of smell with us, and memories of our parents cooking and like our grandparents cooking, and how this means to someone who's in the diaspora, versus maybe when you talk about Caris Lewis' short story about a girl defending herself from sexual harassment on a bus and stuff like that. Let me think about, so there's a poem also by Conley that sort of invites the line structure, starts from the bottom to up. So it is sort of this let me say bending of or even breaking of the rules of how you're supposed to do your lines in poetry, and how you're supposed to do syntax, which is really, really interesting. So everybody just went wild with Rachel, and it was really, really interesting to put it all together. Yeah, so from about the first issue had about 16 pieces. This one we had about 42 plus pieces thereabouts.
Yeah, and I want to invite you to do a reading from Place, so we can also talk about Place. But as you were saying that, just as you were going through that, if I can just take a minute, actually less than a minute, I was struck as you were talking about it, how you start out as you go through each piece, your understanding deepens of this word. So I'd like you to, before you talk about Place, to just give me an idea of why you chose just a single word, and you just threw it out there and then told people think, and then we can talk about Place and a little bit about Ritual. But I wanted to just, as you were doing that, I'm looking at the bios, and I really like how Katleho Kano Shoro talks about Ritual, because for me, what she brought up was this sense of growth, that as I think about it, there are just so many ways in which even I, as one person, is thinking about ritual. And she says, before, when I was confronted by the word ritual, I encountered it as a solemn matter that required a particular uprightedness, carefulness, and collective presence. It was ritual as preservation, ritual as sanctity. Then I mourned the passing of a loved one. After the ceremonial and collective aspects, the mourning continued. But this time, it was up to us as individuals to observe and perform this ritual daily. Ritual as performance, ritual as routine, ritual as cleansing, ritual became personal. Then I found whim and magic in banality. So ritual became whimsical and banal too. Now, ritual is all the things it was before, except the very personal, whimsical, and banal interplay with the serious and sacred. They too are sacred and seriously political. And then she just talks about how this relates to her story. And I'm not going to say what the story is about, and how the pandemic itself, quote, forced us to take stock of our humanness, reestablish routines, and reconfigure rituals. This is what I love about the journals. You really make us think about words. So why words? And as after you say that, please tell me about place. Give me a reading from place.
All right. Cool. So I think I'll also I'll start with place. You know, why words and why just that reflection from that one particular place, unintended. So thing is, what we did with place was this was partly our conversations with Bethel Mudel again, once we decided that, you know, it's going to be a series editor. So Bethel Mudel in 2018, they worked on this project, Wana Kuboeka Philharmonic, which was a sort of an experiment in making together and stuff like that. And I remember there's like this one bit with this essay that he writes about moving through Nairobi, and how, you know, one of the questions that we answer the most as Nairobians is when you're on the phone is uko wapi, you know, where are you? When someone is calling you, first thing says like uko wapi, where are you? So like this continuous thing that's asking you about your place, you know, whether it is psychologically and whether it is physically, and there's also, let me see, I forget the example right now. So yeah, so we sort of invited people to think about where they are at that particular time, and the question of contemporariness and stuff, because also BM talks about this thing where like we want, you know, contemporaries who are also our contemporaries, and how the now, what the now means. There's this song about by Wakadinali that says, you know, ulikuwa wapi, where were you, and where were you, you know, and always this saying, you know, people will ask you, where were you when they burned the world, where were you when the world burned down, and stuff like that. So the question of place always came back to us, like, you know, we are constantly being asked to think about where we are at a particular time. So we just wanted to, you know, also invite our writers and illustrators to think about where they are coming from, where they are, where they want to go, where they are at, and yeah, all those questions about place. So everything just came back to place. If you were to draw a word cloud, place would be like this word over there, and then all these stories just linking to it. Yeah, and with that, I think I will read something from Mude's poem, "The Bridge Beyond the Map," which was sort of the editorial after the introduction took place. Yeah. So let me see. Our witness is the cable that holds up the bridge. What are the coordinates to map a territory of porous borders of self? Katie wraps the news, wrapping the evenings in disrespectful laughter. Take me by the hand, show me the way I can go. Take me by the hand and show me the way to get lost in the mutuality beyond what Marx imagined as the commons, the infinite limitations of what we make as our collective subjectivity. Njoki holds space to author a doorway to another way of grouping. Is there anything but the group? We think of habits and habitation, but inhabit a neighborhood where depth is infinite. Bottom is there, but depth conceals it. Where is the bottom of the utopia we are making? Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I'm thinking, as you say, one of the things I liked about the place is that, you know, I first thought it's an obvious one because you talk about downriver road, so that very much centers us on a place. But then as we get in, you know, the way people think about place, as you've illustrated in the poem, people make places, but places make, perhaps more often, places make people. That's what Idza Luhumyo says. There are people who talk about places belonging, but then also people who talk about place as not belonging, you know, the thing that marks you out as not belonging, places an idea. And for me, it is the way that these ideas, are in conversation with each other that really spark, and that there is no wrong way or right way of doing it. Earlier on, you talked about right at the beginning, and I think this is in when you talk about in at the beginning of place, that part of what you're doing as a journal is this sense of looking for the alternative, this sense of looking. I think that the way it is put is that we are interested in the margins, in shifting centers and new spaces that exist in this space where we call the alternative. Speaking of alternatives, I can see that Kerry Baraka is curious about your hairstyle, which he thinks is an alternative to what he normally is. What is it that you're trying to do? Why are you trying to take us into the space of what we're not used to, into this alternative space?
Okay, good question. I think, so for us, as you were thinking of a journal, coming from the different experiences we've had with publishing, we were sort of trying to imagine, let me see, how do I put it? Let me see.
We've experienced.
Do you want to say something?
We've experienced Kwani, Story Moja. So the question
Kwani
is,
and Story Moja being both, Kwani was a journal itself, it published books, it was a festival space. Story Moja publishes books, it's also a festival space. So you're coming out of these spaces and having experienced them?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I was both employed. So the question is, how do we put this differently? Or how does Frankie make this different?
Yeah, and then also, it. So what we learned as we are putting it together, and even now as you continue, distributing and stuff, is that there's so much work being produced, and even I think we need to amend that small introduction, because like the people who say that there's new work. No new work, so to speak, or something like that. And what essentially we thought of the alternative, and then there's a part there that says that to fashion a world out of a small corner of the internet. So what we are telling guys is essentially there's the certainty of knowing, but we are starting from a point of questions and not knowing. And we invite other people to this thought experiment to see now how do we move from what we know towards what we don't know, which I think is like the biggest exercise of creativity and of like production or something like that. So I don't know about the word alternative. Because alternative to what? Yeah, because like because someone asked also alternative to what? Clifton, sorry?
We have 1,000 books, how do we sell them?
Yeah, so
there's another phrase you use which I quite like. It is, which you say is the journey to becoming who we is, which I thought was an interesting one. And that also takes me to something else. If I go on the online site, so there's yes, you have the issues, and the issues, which are the two of them, are both important, but you're also doing a lot of other work. There are two sections of the online space that I was fascinated. Madogonio. What the heck does that mean? And where? And under Madogonio, it seems to me that you're working with more than just an issue. So talk to me about those two spaces. What do those words mean? And what do people expect when they click there?
Yeah. So Madogonio is sort of this section we have where when we had the first call out, when we had the first call out, we got some stuff that was quite experimental and quite avant-garde, and we really didn't know how or where to place them. And we knew that in subsequent call outs we'll have work like this, and So yeah, we just thought that that would be the place, the home for like experimental stuff, and so far like the sonic piece that we had from Petero Kalule and Yabe Wakabebe and Chebet Fataba, which was sort of a sonic mood poem that was just like taking you somewhere and like super trippy and everything, and you were like, yeah, this is what Matagudanio is. So I think for us, we don't know what Matagudanio is until we see it.
Also, we want to
does it have a meaning?
We want to experiment with stuff. We want to go out there, and we know a lot of African writers are experimenting with surf. So we want to do shit, a lot of shit. And that's what Matagudanio is.
Okay, because this is a word that comes from, I believe, Kikuyu, or it's associated with Kikuyu. I'm not Kikuyu, so yes. I'm guessing. And so it's just this mixture of stuff. And what I like about it is that even if I don't seem to fit into a neat category in terms of the call out, there is space for me in Downriver. Where, what does that mean? And what are you looking for? What's happening if I click there?
No. So Wera is just sort of the collective tab for like all the work that we have. So all the issues sort of are nestled under this tab, and we just thought of an interesting way to call it. So we were like works, no writings, no issues. We're like Wera. So it's like all the work that we have. Click on that, and you just get to explore everything. And as we go in the days, we keep releasing like more stuff, the partnerships that we have, etc. We keep releasing them on the site. So where is just the placement for like all the work, sort of an easy way to get all the work there. It just means work in Kikuyu. So we just like, took that as value.
So I'm highlighting that this because I'm interested in language. As I go through the stories, as I go through the poems, as I look at the work, people use a lot of other languages that slip in depending on where the writer is coming from. Your submissions are primarily in English, I believe. Can somebody submit a story or a poem or something that's in a completely different language? Do you have a language policy? What are you trying to do by allowing this really vibrant space of experimentation with language?
Yeah. So for us, I think Downriver Road, and as an idea, as a journal that also looks at class, for example, language is important to us in terms of like, just the way you have said, code switching. People code switch depending on where they are at, or like depending on which class they are performing their being at that particular time. So like if you're with your workmates, you'll do English. If you're at the garage with your mech, you'll talk in Sheng or in Swahili or something like that. If you want to bargain, you'll maybe talk in vernacular. So, language for us is really important in terms of a signifier of how people navigate communications. And it's also important for us to tell people from all over, actually, essentially, that we can carry your piece in whatever language you're doing, as long as we can do an English translation. So actually, for Ritual, we got a poem from Professor Mutonya Washege, I think, from Wits University. It was in Gikuyu, and we had a challenge of translating it. So we asked him also to give us sort of an English translation. And also I think we had for this partnership we did with NDF in December, we had stuff come out in Sheng, and then we just put it on all there without a translation and stuff like that. So like we are essentially just telling guys like we can also do languages. You can experiment with a range of languages, and as long as you get your story out, we're good with that, within the limitations of translation at this point for us. Yeah.
So if anybody in the participants has questions, I'm happy to take questions. And Kerry, we will hold Frank to that question about his hairstyle. But before I come to questions, I noticed that you said, when we talked about the issue and place, it was very much Kenyan-centric in a sense. And then with Ritual, it opened out. And it seems to me, and I may have missed it, that all the writers seem to be connected to Africa. They're African writers, they're located in Africa. Are you looking at opening up this conversation to people all over the world? Do you want to make it particularly an African conversation? And if so, what do you mean by African?
Yeah.
Frankie, can I answer that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
That's
go next.
So one of our main interests has been to pay writers.
Mm-hmm.
And in the second issue, Lola Shonei paid most of our writers. We give her the money, she paid the writers. So the main question is, how do you pay writers as a publisher?
Mm-hmm.
With the first issue and second issue, and even with the third issue, how do you pay writers? With the third issue, we're still thinking about it, like, how do you pay someone in New York?
Mm-hmm.
And these are the main questions, like, how do you pay writers all over the world?
Mm-hmm.
So we are dealing with that first, and then the rest we'll deal with later.
And also, like on this, and on the second bit of your question, like, is it going to? Are you going to open up? Are other people also allowed to participate and stuff like that? So, on the idea of a platform of this kind, first of all, an independent platform that is just starting out, is that, and this is something that we discussed when we were doing Ritual, and I remember Warimu asking me, like, are we going to publish? Let me say, work. What happens when you get a lot of work from, for example, people outside Africa? And, are we going to give priority to people within Africa? And, how does that work and stuff like that? So it's a very difficult question, because we really want to give the platform, first of all, to like people who haven't had the chance to like get access to such platforms. And also we want to balance that with publishing work that is good, regardless where it's coming from. So, striking that balance is really tricky, and I think we're still navigating that, because we've had a mix from like all races, from all places. We've had work from the US. We had work from white academics. We've had work from Kenyans in the diaspora. We've had work from Kenyan academics in the diaspora. So like, and we've got a mix of everything. So you ask yourself, like, are you going to run this piece from, you just have like $30 to pay your writer? Are you going to like, give this $30 to this professor from this place? Are you going to give it to like
It's cut in half by the banks,
Nairobi Uni or something? Yeah, so it's a conversation that we keep having, and it helps us that we have the online platform. In a way, it's limitless in terms of what we can carry and what we can run on that. But for the print, we really want to give priority to like African writers and African people who are like within this space. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
It does, and I think it opens up that people are interested. In fact, Alan Mackenzie has asked our submissions accepted from the African diaspora and the Caribbean in particular. So this is something that I think it would be great to be able to open up the conversations to Africans wherever they are, but also people to see, what does it look like when a particular idea is explored from another cultural, physical, or whatever kind of space. I'd like, I know we've had some poetry.
Caribbean and Trinidad and Tobago, they cut money by half.
Sorry, I can't hear you very clearly. I'm Clifton.
No, I'm saying the Trinidad and Tobago, they cut money by half.
They cut money by half?
Yeah.
Okay, in the sense
I think
of...
he's talking about the transfer charges in terms of paying contributors.
Yeah.
I think Clifton is talking about the transfer charges.
Yeah, so then that becomes the problem
It's
in
a bit
terms of
expensive.
figuring out that. Thank you.
But we do take work. At Once Mackenzie, we do take work from the African diaspora, and we did have work from a Caribbean writer in Ritual. So yeah, we are completely open.
Okay, and then Sam is asking, and as he's going to ask this question, and then I'm going to ask you, could you just give us a little bit of a taste of some of the fiction, if possible? But Sam is asking about archives. What are you doing to ensure that the issues that you have produced become part of the, not just Kenyan, but I'd say African, the world literary heritage beyond the here and now? Because often what happens is that these journals just disappear. You know, they're there, and if you miss them, you miss them.
That's why actually we were really insistent on print despite the expense, because our website, you can wake up tomorrow and our website is gone, and then you just have dead links of stories. But print, if you have like 1,000 copies of Ritual that are out, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, you might just find a copy in a basement somewhere and can be passed on to someone else. So in a way, that's how we approach archiving the work that we have. The print is like, I think, the best archive or form of storage for this particular work. Also in terms of like going back to seeing how we were thinking towards these things, and in retrospect, that is like 5 years later, I keep looking at the first, second, third, and even all the way to like 25, 6 thereabouts, and I'm always just mind blown about some of the work that is in there, and I always discover interesting stuff. I don't know how that would be if it was online. So yeah, print for us is the first defense against erasure, and the fact that we try as much as possible to send copies everywhere, and we still have a couple of copies like for store and stuff like that, because we know that in future ones we are able to have international travel, international mailing, we're able to send more copies outside. So yeah, I say like print is not dead. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question of the archive.
We're drawing to a close, but I wondered if before we just do the sign off, could you please just give us a bit of a reading, perhaps from fiction, something?
Yeah. I had actually selected a piece from Lutiveni Manyanja's Morning Period. So let me just read this. According to Miriam's mother, Lily turned up for Aunt Flora's wedding committee meeting and introduced herself as Bibi Ajemo. She had the kind of hairdo that was only seen on schoolgirls' heads. Rows of neat lines, all meeting at the back of her head, then tied together with a black string. Her hands appeared more aged than the rest of her body, veins protruding and palms rough, maybe from picking tea, maybe from digging for hours, or maybe just harsh detergent. Miriam's mother said later that Lily Wajemo contributed to the wedding kitty. It wasn't as if she'd just come to ask for help. Her turning up like that reminded everyone about Sharon, the other disappearing relative. Sharon was Jemo's older sister. She disappeared in America. No letters or phone calls. So that was like a piece that we got from Lutivini, and it was, that particular phrase was just for anybody who studied abroad, and for anybody who's like had a long stay abroad or something like that. There's something that immediately just jumps to you about the ritual of surviving outside, and then like she talks about the uncertainty of work abroad, and that disconnect between the relatives who are there and those who are here home, and how it comes about in funerals and stuff, and the taboo around missing funerals and all that. So it was like a really interesting fiction piece for us. And there's more. I would like to invite guys to go online, check us out, and also just get copies, talk to Kwani Bookshop. They have our copies. And enjoy and help support independent publishing.
I really want to thank you, Franklin. And I do want to also thank Clifton and everybody else who's participated through the questions. I can't believe the hour has already just flown by, and there is still so much to talk about. The fact that you are publishing other things apart from the journals. I really wanted to talk about, that you were poetry, anthology, but I encourage everybody, as Clifton and Franklin have put in so much work with the rest of their team, please go to downriverroad.org and just explore what is on the site. And submit. Their submission guidelines are there. So normally when we have these conversations, you get to hear me talk to one person whose work is already done and dusted off. But the interesting, exciting thing about this is that you can be part of that next issue. I'd like to, Franklin, if you have one last word to say, and perhaps just tell us in like 30 seconds, what is the next issue going to be about? What's the idea you want to throw out there?
So issue 3, I'm going to talk about issue 4 because issue 3 is closed right now. So we're done with issue 3, more or less. So issue 4 is going to be on radio. So we'll have a call out sometime next month on issue 3. And we want to explore radio as art, radio as archive, radio as performance, radio as even as identity and as a storytelling medium. So we are really excited about that. And yeah.
I think Kegro is online. We're talking about nonfiction.
When now that you've said issue 3 is already ready, okay, it's you've gotten everything together. When can we expect that? And what
issue 3 is on nonfiction.
Is on?
Issue 3 is nonfiction, and we've invited, so we did direct commissions, and the title of the journal will be a title piece. So we invited guys to sort of write nonfiction pieces and narrative pieces on protest and the idea of protest and how they approach protest. And it was really interesting in the last year when we had Uganda, we had Tanzania, and then we had and then we had Lekki in Nigeria. So we sort of just invited guys, and then also Sabasaba, much of our lives in Nairobi. So we just invited guys to sort of write to protest and essentially do nonfiction pieces. So it's also an interesting experience, learning things about, fact checking and form and craft, and we are getting close to sort of the last stages of copy editing and design and layout, and we hope to put it out sometime next month. Yeah.
So late March 29th.
Okay. We are so looking forward to it. In March, let's continue the conversation. If you haven't already had a chance to delve in and investigate what people had to say about place, about ritual, please do that as you wait to find out about protest, and then submit or come in and join the conversation and hear what people have to say about radio. I can only join Keguro, who says, thank you for this wonderful discussion. It was great to hear the thinking behind and around the journal and all its processes. To Laura, to Ali, to Carrie, to everybody else who's written in, keep the conversation going on. Thank you, everybody. We will be continuing the conversation 2 weeks from now, when we will be bringing you another exciting book. Thank you for introducing us to this literary mag, and we will keep the conversations going online. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.